People quite often ask how I achieve a misty effect in some of my paintings. So I thought I'd run you through a technique that I use that involves water at every stage. So I'll start by wetting the sheet all over and getting it very wet, and then I work straight into that. And I've got a video over on my Patreon at the moment where I explain how to control a wet-in wet wash. So if you're interested in that, do go and check that out. There'll be a link in the description of this video. But like I said, wet the paper all over, get it very wet. I'm not sure if you can see on the sheet how wet it is. It's got quite a bit of a shine to it there. And I'm going to start by painting straight into that. So I'll just pick up some of the grey that's in the palette there. It's just left over from another painting. And I'll just drop some alizarin into there. And so that instantly takes the glow off the alizarin. You don't want it to be pure alizarin really, it's too strong. But just use some of your palette greys. And so I'll lay that in and you can see how wet that is. It's pretty much dispersing. And just drop a little bit of raw sienna in there as well. And again, lay that in. I want the sky is going to be very simple, but it should have a nice sort of misty look to it. Now just put some ultramarine in there. And just bring that across in places, and that will all run together. And by the time it dries, it will just be a very kind of subdued, misty looking sky, hopefully. And just leaving a little bit of white behind as well. And that should add some nice light to the finished painting. But just allowing that wash just to run down in the wet there. I just picked up a little bit of cadmium yellow now, and I'll just mix that in. And I'll just bring some of that across for the land. And I want a little stream running through. So I'll draw that on with the brush essentially. I don't like using any pencil lines when doing this kind of painting because the washes are so sort of light and thin that pencil would sort of shine through it. So just do all the drawing with the brush, just mark everything out at this stage. And so you can see where I've left that white behind, that's going to be a little stream running through. And I'll just switch to a slightly smaller brush and just pick up some blue. Got some ultramarine and some cobalt. And I'll just put in some distant trees and laying that into the wet wash as well. And so just find a pleasing sort of tree shape there. And because I'm laying it into the wet, that should just sort of sink back and recede off into the distance. And now that's all running together as well. Now I just mixed up a little bit of Viridian with some raw sienna and just some bits left over in the palette, and lay some of that into the land as well. And because I'm laying it into wet, it should all run down and mix together quite nicely. And now as I lay that on, you should start to see like the outline of where the stream's running through. But just going in and varying the mix all the time as well. And I'll just put some burnt sienna in there. Even at this stage, it's important to always vary the mix. So you don't want to be laying on just one colour. And just bring that stream just around the bend there. I'll have a large tree on the left hand side. And that's essentially the first wash done. But I'm just going to grab a little piece of paper towel. And you can get some quite nice mist effects just by blotting out some of the paper, some of the paint on the paper, I should say. And that creates a little bit of separation between those trees there in the distance and the land. And then when I lay washes on over the top of that, just some of that white area should still be visible behind, and that creates a nice effect that there's some mist in the distance there. And I can mop up that little bead that's formed across the bottom as well while I'm doing this, just to stop any run backs. But very simple, just blot out just a little bit of the paint, and now I'll dry that first wash. Okay, it's fully dry now, so I'm going to start working on the next wash. And I still want everything to be wet, so I'm going to wet the paper again. So I'm just using the mist bottle for that. And again, quite a lot of water. And so I'm going to start working on a tree on the left hand side there. So I just picked up some ultramarine. And I'll mix that up quite thick, mix that in with some of the grey that's on the palette as well. And just lay into that wet from the mist bottle that I sprayed on there, and allow that to sort of run around. I'll just put some burnt sienna in as well, so varying the mixture. And then using the side of the brush, tip of the brush, and just essentially using the whole brush just to get lots of different textural marks on there. And so laying some of the darker paint into the wet paint, allowing it all to run. And lay more blue in, so always just ever so slightly changing that mixture. And you should be able to see there where I've laid that paint in onto the wet, it's moving around and it's spreading out, but that's all going to add to the overall misty feel. So more blue, more burnt sienna, getting quite dark now. I can start to bring that all the way down. And so really getting quite dark as I come down to the base of the tree. And now give that whole tree area another spray with the bottle. And I want it all to run around and move about. And now I can start to get a little bit of texture in on the fields there, and just start to define the banks of the stream. But again, spraying everything as I go. You have to be quite mindful of the texture of the paint or the thickness of the paint when you're doing this kind of thing. Like I said, I made a whole video on this and it's on my Patreon at the moment. So if you want to see how to handle a wet in wet wash, go and check that out. And I'll just lay some of that raw sienna mix as well that's left behind, and just drop that in, and again give it another little spray. And you should be able to see there where that water and the paint are mixing on that tree. That's all running and falling down the sheet, but that's perfectly fine. That's what I'm looking for. And now just bring another wet wash over the land and define the shape of the stream running through as well. and just blend that whole tree together in with the land as well. And so essentially not really getting any hard edges, everything running together. And give it all another little spray. Now even more blue and burnt sienna, and I can work back into that tree. Because it's all still wet, I can keep working into it and just laying in more layers of paint. And just defining the shape a little bit more. And so just looking how the paint's moving around and seeing where I can lay back in. And so just drop some darks in across the land now as well. Now that's all going to run and mix together. Now just start to outline a few mid-ground areas there. And also making connections between left and right the whole time. And essentially just trying to find a balance in the composition as well. You don't want anything to be too weighted to one side or the other. And so now just get some darks across the bank of the stream there as well. And I'm just going to switch brushes, and I'll just give the whole thing another little spray as well. Get everything to start running. And I'll just pick up the rigger. You can see where that bead has formed across the bank there. I can tease some of that out now. And I'm just going to use that to paint the reflection of the tree in the stream. And so really just dragging some water across and allowing it all to run down into where I dragged it. And the same on the bank on the right hand side. I can move that around a little bit and just make it a bit more of a pleasing shape. But really making sure that I don't completely cover up all the light that's on that stream, because I think in the finished painting that will be a nice area of light coming down. I'll just drop a little bit of blue on the left hand side there as well. I was getting a little bit lost, so I want some distance over there as well. So it's just a little bit of cobalt blue. And I can touch some of that in on the right hand side as well. And so I'm essentially just building up layers of wet washes just all on top of each other, allowing them to run together. And it kind of looks like a little bit of a mess, really, pretty much all the way through this painting, but then it's the finishing touches that will bring it all together. And so I've just mixed up even more dark paint. And I can just touch some of that back in and just re-establish the bank of the stream. And that creates a little bit of separation between the bank and the reflections. And just getting some darks in at the base of the tree as well. And the same on the right hand side. And I'm just starting to think about adding a few details now. But still by painting back into the wet. So it will soften. and just getting some marks in on the field. And every time you go back in and add another little wet wash over the top of this, it does soften and run together, but leaves a little bit of itself behind, if that makes sense. And then so you just build up layer upon layer of wet wash. So in many ways it is kind of overworking, but it really does achieve a very nice misty effect working like this. And so just dropping a few more darks in, just in that mid-ground. And that gives the impression that there's like a row of bushes or something that are running off round the bend, off into the distance. Okay, I'm just going to dry that second wash now. Okay, now it's all about adding some more detail and getting some strong darks in there. But again, I do still want it to be wet and soft. So I'll just mix up even more dark paint, same as before, ultramarine, burnt sienna, and just give a little mist over that tree. But I've decreased the amount of water this time. And so I do still want everything to soften off, but just not be running as much as the previous two washes. So I can lay paint on and give it another little mist. And now I'm just starting to get a little bit of detail in there now. So by laying some darker foliage areas over the top of the misty previous wash, it gives a sense of depth, adds a 3D feel to the tree as well. And so this stage is really just about defining some areas, not too many, but I think even in a misty painting you do need a few little hard edges just to tie everything together and just give the painting a bit of context. And so I'm just using a sable rigger, which I really like for painting foliage. It gives some real nice little shapes without painting individual leaves or anything like that. So just laying little bits of paint on and giving it a tiny little spritz with the bottle. And now the tree's starting to take shape. And I can just start redefining just the areas of the stream, just so the edges of the bank there. And so just by laying a few little darks in, a few slightly harder edges, everything really starts taking shape now. And so more same ultramarine, burnt sienna, and just can start popping in a few little tree trunks. And so it just gives the impression there's a little group of trees there. And a few little branches coming out the top as well and out the side. And another tiny little spritz there just to soften everything off a tiny little bit. And now I could just start working on adding some texture in the land. And a couple more little branches. And just looking at the whole thing. And just trying to find a nice little balanced shape. So suggestion that there's a little tree going on behind there as well. And a few tiny little bits of texture just in the sort of mid-ground going off into the distance. And so using quite wet paint at this stage, but just allowing each layer of paint just to touch the last one so it runs together, but leaving a few little hard areas behind. Now just soften the bottom of that bank line there, just enough so it's not too hard an edge, and just so it runs down a little bit into the water area. And now I can just start bringing some texture out on the right hand side. And then looking at the whole painting as well, and always looking to find a balance, and making sure I haven't got too much dark or too much light on one side or the other. And I'll just switch back to the slightly larger brush and just cover that area. And again, give another tiny little spritz over, just so I haven't got any real hard edges. And now I can lay some dark paint into that. I want to get a little bit of definition on those mid-ground bushes as well, and taking care to leave the misty area behind them. Don't want to completely cover up where I blotted out in the first wash. And so working very quickly just to find a few bush shapes, and just to create a little bit of separation between the distance, the mid-ground and the foreground. And again, another tiny little spritz. And just soften a few little edges and lay some darks in as well. So mix up a little bit more dark paint. And now I could just start laying in the dark paint on top of the damp wash, and you can see that softening as well and running down. But just by getting these darker edges in, it's just going to give the painting a nice little bit of context and just help to pull everything together. And so some real dark paint now down in the foreground. And so saving the darkest paints for right down in the foreground there. And that helps to push the distance back as well. And I can just soften those areas with a little bit of water on the brush. And so working very loosely with the rigger and just dragging it around, just get some nice little textural areas. And I've just given that another little spritz as well. And now the tree's dried off a tiny little bit, I can drop in a few of the darkest areas in there, just to create a few little shadows. And it helps to give the tree a 3D look as well. I think we're pretty much coming to the end. I've just had a few more little marks here and there. And so a little bit more texture, little clumps of grass and whatever it is just in the field there. But I think that's it. I think that's the painting done. Okay, that's a finished painting. I've dried it fully, and you can see everything softens and blends together and gives a real nice sort of misty feel. It's quite apt for this time of year, quite nice autumnal feel to it. So do give it a go, try the technique, let me know how you get on. It will take a little bit of getting used to if you're not used to using a lot of water. You will have to persevere and just get a feel for how much paint you need with how much water. And you can always blot out with a bit of paper towel as well if things start looking like they're running too much. But like I said, do give it a go and tag me social media and things like that if you're going to post it online. And check out my Patreon. Like I said previously in the video, there is a video over there where I talk about how to control a wet in wet wash. So do have a look at that. And I'll be back again next week with another video. So thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great week.